Good afternoon from Lower Manhattan outside the district court here. Plenty of historical drama happening right now. Donald Trump is inside that court, but also out here on the streets. There are plenty of supporters and detractors, and of course hundreds of police officers and the world's media. Never before has an American president faced criminal charges like this. Never before has there been a politician, let's face it, like Donald J. Trump. And not since the Civil War has this nation been this viscerally, this tribally divided. Some greet him with almost cult-like devotion, others with the opposite, revulsion. Donald Trump is in the dock, but the whole American justice system, as well as the democracy, you might say here, is on the line. To sum it all up today, what's really going on, here's Siobhan Kennedy.
From the moment Donald Trump descended from his golden tower into American political life, many predicted this day would come. Having skirted the law for years, scandal after scandal, that he today is being held to account. As America and the world watched on, Trump's motorcade made its way through the streets of Manhattan, the city he once called home, carrying a former president on his way to be arrested as a common criminal. Whatever follows this moment, a trial, a possible conviction, this day will go down in history. The first time an American former commander-in-chief has been arrested and charged with a crime. That the man whose finger once hovered over the red nuclear button would today have those same fingers daubed in ink for prints and perhaps a mugshot taken is the stuff of elaborate fiction.
Yes, I love Trump.
But Donald Trump has rewritten all the rules and in so doing has convinced his supporters, including the disgraced Congressman George Santos, that this is all a big witch hunt and Trump is the billionaire victim.
I'm here to support the President of the United States who's being unfairly attacked by a DA.
That it's come to this circus outside a Manhattan courtroom is because of this. An alleged sexual encounter nearly 20 years ago with Stormy Daniels, a former adult film actress who claims she had a brief affair with Donald Trump and was paid hush money to keep quiet when she threatened to go public with her story. The money was paid by Michael Cohen, Trump's then lawyer, who later admitted his guilt and served time in jail. The problem for Donald Trump? That he paid Cohen back in a series of checks that were classified as legal expenses. And it's those payments that are at the heart of today's charges against him. Outside, the Trump faithful need no convincing as to his innocence.
This is the fourth time they tried to stop him from being president. 2 impeachments, a fake fraudulent election, and now they're doing it again. They do not want this man back in Washington, D.C.
And stop listening to all of the ba on the TV, trying to make Trump look bad the same way they have since 2015, before he even became president.
Why are you here dressed as Abraham Lincoln, sir?
Well, I want to show my support for the democratic process, and these kind of trials never happened to Ronald Reagan or to other like Eisenhower because they weren't doing all these strange, nefarious things. And
Trump needs to be held accountable, first and foremost, and then we all got to push back.
Whatever happens inside that court, this case has already potentially reshaped the outcome of America's next election because, of course, Donald Trump is running to become president again in 2024. Up until now, his campaign had been relatively low-key. Not anymore.
Perversely, being charged today has supercharged Trump's presidential campaign. That doesn't bode well for the other Republicans planning to stand against him in the primaries. But when it comes to a national election in 2024, being a criminally charged, potentially convicted presidential candidate may not go down so well.
Well, Siobhan is with me here in this extraordinary place. It is a bit of a zoo, isn't it? Some people might say it's a circus.
Only Donald Trump could bring these people out like
this. And a lot of it, of course, happening around the corner, but we're here because there's a slightly better signal. Tell me what the choreography is today.
Well, Matt, the choreography looks something like this. Of course, a lot of it is unknown because it's going on inside that building, those buildings there. behind us. We know that Donald Trump entered the district attorney's office at 1:24 p.m. I know because I watched it on the television.
Good for you.
We know then he is going to face the ignominy of being fingerprinted. He will not, we understand, have a mugshot taken because he has, after all, one of the most...
We kind of know what he looks like.
We kind of know what he looks like. He's not exactly a flight risk.
Yeah.
That's what they have determined. From there, he will walk through the building into the courtroom where the judge will be waiting and where he will have those charges read to him. They are due to be released imminently.
And just to say, we're actually watching, sorry to interrupt you there, Sean, we're watching the door of the courtroom, all those cops there, because we're expecting Donald Trump to appear at any moment.
We are.
Because he's told us, or his people have told us, they've told our people, that he may want to say something.
Apparently, in another Donald Trump first, as only he could, he's going to halt the proceedings before he is due for his appointment with the judge at 2:15 and say a couple of words first in the corridor if he is allowed, Matt.
Right, okay.
Back to the proceeding. The judge will be waiting for him when he does walk in. He will have those charges read to him. We will get those sometime in the next 15-20 minutes and we'll be quickly sifting through them. We know that he is due to plead. He's told us, let's face it, not guilty. Him or his lawyer will do that. And from there, we have to assume Donald J. Trump will make bail. He is due to return to his residence in Mar-a-Lago this evening, where he has already lined up a coterie of press. He will have a press conference and denounce what he is calling this witch hunt here in Manhattan. And there in Mar-a-Lago, he will wait for his trial date, which could, Matt, take place a year from now, raising the prospect that we will have Donald Trump potentially campaigning to be the next president of the United States, whilst he is simultaneously standing at trial over criminal charges here in Manhattan.
Because in previous cases involving his organization, the tactic has always been delay, 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 and it's worked for him so far.
It certainly has. I mean, we're talking another year. Of course, there'll be shenanigans to and fro once the charges are released. His people will do all they can to throw this case out. They'll say it's beyond the statute of limitations, that it's too late, that the charges will never land. They'll do everything they can. But it does look now as if he will stand trial.
The extraordinary thing here is not just the way that he's approached these criminal charges, turning this courtroom into a political arena for a campaign event, if you like, but also the fact that this is a man who just in November, when we were together in front of the White House, we were saying the guy's finished because his candidates in the midterm elections did not do well. And now he's back again. Some people are saying he'll get the nomination.
Only Donald Trump, exactly. His campaign had kicked off. It was extremely low-key. We, other members of the media, weren't even really covering it. And several lawyers, you know, Democratic-leaning lawyers, have said to me a couple of weeks ago they would have thought Trump has got no chance of winning the Republican nomination. Now, Matt, because of this, because of all of them, they believe it's pretty much a slam dunk.
And again, just to remind you, we're watching these pictures. That's inside the courtroom. We are waiting for Donald Trump, having had the charges read to him, having been fingerprinted, and, well, no mugshot today, but all the other stuff, that he will actually then address his followers, America, from there, an ex-presidential address, the likes of which we've never seen before. And this is just the beginning, isn't it? I mean, this is the first of potentially 4 trials that he's facing.
That's right. He's facing other potential criminal cases in Georgia over his efforts to overturn the results of the election there. And of course, the 2 cases currently inside the Department of Justice, one over those documents, Matt, that he allegedly took from the White House and squirreled away, stored away.
Boxes of them. Yeah.
Boxes of them. He denies that, of course. He says he had every right to take them. And the other, of course, is over the January 6th insurrection and his involvement and whether or not he was responsible for what happened there on that day.
So there's the legal drama today, and then there's the broader political drama of a nation that will have to choose a president in 2024. You've got Donald Trump, who may well get the nomination as possibly a convicted felon, right?
That's possible.
It's possible, and it does not prevent him from running for president.
Does not, Matt.
And then you've got Joe Biden, who's 80. So the Democrat Party is held hostage to the cardiovascular system of an old man, a very old man, and the Republican Party is held hostage to Donald Trump.
Exactly. We're just going to watch all of this play out here in Manhattan. And as we said, it wasn't likely that he was going to win the nomination. All the talk has been about Ron DeSantis, but now this is supercharged, if you like, his campaign. Certainly in Republican circles. I do think, Matt, though, the big question is, nationally, when it comes to the vote in 2024, being a criminally indicted, potentially convicted Republican candidate might not go down so well with voters at large.
With swing voters, right? The ones who decide elections. But I mean, he's got a cult-like following there. I mean, you saw some of those people outside the courthouse.
He has with them, but the swing voters, as you say, are the ones that matter.
Decide,
and
exactly.
if there was any sense that they may have forgotten the Trump of the past and were veering towards perhaps Donald Trump, as you say, rather than aging Joe Biden, well, I don't know. Let's just see what happens.
You have been here now, what is it, almost
Nearly
4 years?
yes.
4 years. How does this bit of history fit in with all the other stuff that you've covered?
Well, it's just incredible, isn't it? I mean, we just don't know what's going to happen here. This is Donald Trump, who's had a series of firsts, but who would have thought that he would now become the first former president to be criminally indicted? Many people would have thought, yes, it's coming to him, but today it's actually happened. It's changed his history, but it's also changing the course of American history, Matt.
And finally, what message does this send to the rest of the world? Does it send the message that American justice is working, or does it send the message that they elect people who end up in court?
Well, it depends who you ask, Matt, doesn't it? I mean, on the one hand, you see all his protesters there. They would say democracy is not working, but several people around here think this is exactly what should be happening, that no person, whether it's Donald Trump or a normal criminal going through those doors, nobody should be above the law. And that is what they believe we are seeing playing out, whether Donald Trump and his followers like it or not.
Okay, well, we're still waiting for Donald Trump to appear. We still have that eye on the door with the cops standing, the NYPD standing in front of it, waiting for him to appear. But let us just look at the other judicial problems that he faces. As we discussed, Siobhan, there are quite a few. Here's Kieran Woodley.
Former presidents aren't meant to make journeys like these. They usually walk together, give the occasional speech, or build their presidential library. They're not meant to travel to court, not meant to question the institutions they once promised to preserve, protect, and defend. But if Donald Trump made the abnormal normal, get used to these scenes too. This is just the start of a litany of legal woes.
The home of the 45th President of the United States has been raided by the FBI.
Last year, this was the definition of unprecedented and historic. The FBI seizing documents from Mar-a-Lago. The National Archives had been trying for more than a year to obtain classified government documents from the former president. A special counsel is now looking into whether Trump not only mishandled sensitive information, but obstructed justice by hiding that he had certain files. He himself has denied any wrongdoing, and his family came out swinging.
And all of a sudden, 30 agents descend upon Mar-a-Lago? Sean, this didn't come from the local FBI field office in Palm Beach, Florida. You know who this came from. This came from one place and one building, and that is the White House.
That political point scoring has intensified after the discovery of government documents in President Biden's home from his time in the Obama administration. With the special counsel also looking into that, any charges against Trump will pose the question, what about Mr. Biden?
President, Mr. President, classified material next to your Corvette, what were you thinking?
Let me, I'm going to get a chance to speak on all this, God willing, soon. But as I said earlier this week, people, and by the way, my Corvette's in a locked garage.
And Trump's defeat by Biden in 2020 is what really hangs over the Donald in so many ways. In another case, a special grand jury in the swing state of Georgia has been investigating whether Trump and his associates tried to overturn his election loss there, something they deny. Those allegations came to light when this explosive phone call to Georgia's Secretary of State was leaked just after the election.
We have many, many times the number of votes necessary to win the state, and we won the state, and we won it very substantially.
President Trump, we've had several lawsuits, and we've had to respond in court to the lawsuits and the contentions. We don't agree that you have won.
So what are we going to do here, folks? I only need 11,000 votes. Fellas, I need 11,000 votes. Give me a break.
And those alleged failed attempts to overturn the election in Georgia led directly to January the 6th. That other historic, unprecedented day when rioters sought to stop the lawful transfer of power. A day that many thought would end the Trump chapter in American politics. While all the other investigations are away from the TV cameras, the case against Trump on January the 6th has already partly played out on American prime time during congressional hearings last year.
He would not issue a public statement instructing his supporters to disperse and leave the Capitol. No man who would behave that way at that moment in time can ever serve in any position of authority in our nation again.
Yet that's exactly what he wants to do, despite being referred to the Justice Department for that insurrection, and despite all those other cases too. That's why there are no winners here. Charged or not charged, guilty or not guilty, Trump will argue it all fits a pattern, a witch hunt against him. There are no winners, just a nation on edge for possibly years to come. Today is only the beginning.
Well, we're watching the live shot of the Lower District Court of Manhattan here, just around the corner from where we're standing. Apparently, Donald Trump, as we speak, is on the 15th floor of that building. We're waiting for him to come down to the ground floor, come down to earth, and appear in front of that door at any moment to address the people that have been waiting outside in the square, and indeed the people of America and listening around the world. Now, before we came on air, I spoke to someone who worked for Donald Trump for all of 11 days when he was his chief of communications in the White House, Anthony Scaramucci. He knows Trump well. Before he worked for him in the White House, he worked for him for months. He knew him very well here in New York and the New York scene for years. I asked him what he thought was going through Donald Trump's mind today.
I think there's a combination of things going on, frankly. I think one is a little bit of sadness. I don't think anybody likes to be arrested. I don't think anybody likes to be fingerprinted or having a mugshot taken of them. And so I think there's a little bit of sadness there. I think in the beginning part of it, perhaps there was a little bit of anxiety. And now I think that's converting, knowing Mr. Trump's personality, that's converting into defiance and counterpunching and a political strategy that he's now going to use this as a totem for fundraising and potentially galvanizing his base of support. And so even though a lot of Americans have polled like the indictment, they understand the indictment, his supporters do not, and they are very much so with him. And this will likely increase the likelihood of him winning the Republican nomination if he decides to stay in the race.
Are you serious about that?
I am serious about that. Yes, I think that his support, he has sort of a cult-like grip on, let's call it 15 to 20% of the Republican Party. And if the Republicans decide to put up 8 to 10, 12 candidates, something like that, versus Donald Trump, they'll sort of marginalize each other and he'll have his very galvanized base of support. Yeah, I think that would be a long-term recipe for disaster for the Republican Party. And he's probably one of the Republican candidates that Joe Biden could handily beat in the 2024 election. But I think this sort of stuff that's going on at that courthouse behind you, at least to his supporters, it looks like political martyrdom, and it looks like a politically contrived indictment.
But this is just the beginning, right? I mean, there are several other court cases, criminal cases that he could be facing down the line. Many of them, most of them, more serious than the one that started today. So do you really think that he'll be campaigning for the White House while also going from one courtroom to another?
Well, that's what I said. If he stays in the race, I did qualify it with that because you're right. If he gets indicted in Georgia, if he has these allegations that lead to an indictment related to the J6 investigation and the insurrection at the Capitol building, those are bigger problems for Mr. Trump. Those are meatier indictments. And so, that may cause him to pull out of the race.
He made his political career. He got into the White House partly on the slogan, "Lock her up," talking about Hillary Clinton. Do you think this is to some extent revenge, just desserts, poetic justice?
Well, yeah, I mean, I'm sure that the Clintonites probably think that there's a little bit of karma here, that he was pushing for her to be locked up. It looks like now he's going to face the gallows. But I think the likelihood of the president, the former president of the United States, spending any time in prison, no matter what the lis pendens of allegations are or the criminal complaint against them, I think it's very small. He'll likely have a negotiated settlement. Perhaps part of that settlement is that he drops the political candidacy for the presidency. But even though he said lock her up to Hillary Clinton, and even though he's in a whole bunch of trouble, I don't see him going to jail as a result of any of the things that are withstanding him today or coming in the near future.
It's normally when politicians go on trial, they walk into the courtroom with their spouse hand in hand to show some degree of humane solidarity. That's not in evidence here today.
I guess what I would say in that situation, the family members probably want to distance themselves a little bit from the politics of it. I think each of them in their own way has been burned by the political system or hurt by the political system. And so Mr. Trump wants to stay in the game. I think many of them, including Jared and Ivanka, do not. Not to say that they don't love and respect their father, but they want to move on and away from the game. And that's why I don't think you see them present today.
Anthony Scaramucci, thank you very much indeed.
All right. Thank you, sir. Bye-bye.
And just to remind you that we are looking at a live shot of the door on the ground floor of the court building around the corner from where I'm standing, where we are expecting Donald Trump, who's currently apparently on the 15th floor of that building, having been fingerprinted and having had his charges read to him, to appear at that door. And we've been told by his people that he wants to say something. We don't know what, but we can imagine what he wants to say. Okay, well, with me now here is Linda Kenny Barton, a former prosecutor and a presenter on the Law and Crime Network, who was famously played her part, was rather played by Helen Mirren, no less, in a film about prosecuting Phil Spector.
Yes, but I was representing him.
Okay, and you're absolutely. It's great to see you here.
Nice seeing you also.
What are you waiting for? We're all waiting for Donald Trump to say something, but as someone who knows the law, what are you waiting for?
Well, I want to see the indictment.
Yeah.
I think the indictment has to be more than just he falsified documents. I think there has to be some underlying charges, tax evasion, maybe even the New York version of RICO, which everyone is familiar with.
Just explain what that is.
And that is a racketeering type offense, where obviously you could use the Trump organization, him, maybe with Weisselberg, maybe with Cohen, to say they were committing crimes for a long period of time, and there's real penalties, up to 25 years in jail.
So that's the RICO charges are normally leveled against people who work for the mob, right?
Well, that's how it started.
Mafiosi.
Yeah, it started as being a mob situation, but the government has been using RICO now in whatever form you have, state forms, federal forms, against any type of organization. There's even a civil RICO that people can file.
Okay. There are some people who really don't like Donald Trump at all, who say that this case brought against him here in Manhattan, is not a great one to start off with, considering all the other stuff that's out there, trying to overturn election results, inciting insurrection on Capitol Hill, etc., etc. Why remind us why this is the first of the cases to be heard?
Well, this is the one that Michael Cohen, who represented him as a lawyer. Yeah. Remember attorney-client privilege? Oh, it went away, right? And he was committing frauds, and he pleaded guilty. So they really had an in with somebody that knew Donald Trump and also said, I'm guilty. I'm going to prison for this. So that's why this case started. And also, it was around Stormy Daniels, right? Yeah. So it had a lot of internet flavor. Did he pay off Stormy Daniels because he was having a relationship with her when he was married and his wife was tending to the newborn son? So it had a lot of social media, love, shall we say.
Okay. Now, the Trump supporters and Trump himself have been incredibly critical of the district attorney, saying that he's basically conducting a witch hunt, a political campaign to bring Donald Trump down. What would you say to that accusation?
Well, I practice in New York and New Jersey. Alvin Bragg has been a federal prosecutor and is now a state prosecutor, now DDA. he is not a lightweight. You have to be very careful going against Alvin Bragg because he knows what he is doing. Plus, he also knows that in this jurisdiction, in the federal courthouse, where we're right across the street from, really, in a couple of weeks, there's going to be a civil case involving whether Donald Trump raped a woman called E. Jean Carroll.
Yeah.
And then, of course, it's a Georgia election prosecution fraud that may come down. And we also know that the Justice Department is investigating him. And this morning...
The guy's drowning in cases.
Right. And this morning, the federal court just said, nope. You, Donald Trump, you wanted, your Mark Meadows, your chief of staff in the White House, not to testify. We're saying he has to testify. So this is the beginning of what the prosecution looks to see as an effect.
Is there any way that his lawyers could get this case either thrown out or moved somewhere else?
Well, moving is kind of hard. I mean, you just have to look around you. If you pan your cameras, this is bigger than O.J. Simpson was. For those that remember O.J. Simpson, there must be 100 satellite trucks here. Can they get it thrown out? Well, if the charges are just that he falsified records and to beat an underlying federal, because you have to have a federal crime to make it a felony, right? There's a possibility that the jury could say, wait a second, if the federal crime, for instance, is Stormy Daniels, is election law violation, he was just paying her off because he didn't want his family to know. Right. He was not violating the laws.
And just a specific case of what could be troublesome for him here, it's not the fact that he paid her the hush money, it's how he did it, or how his lawyers did it on his command.
It's how his lawyers did it, and Alvin Bragg, I believe, has the evidence to show that he signed the check to Michael Cohen, and that also Michael Cohen says he knew that he was going to be violating election laws, that there is an admission.
Linda, the rest of the world, including Britain, cannot get its head around the idea that there's a guy who's in court, might even end up in jail, but is still going to be running for president. That is possible, is it not? It is constitutional, even though it's nuts.
It is absolutely possible. You know, we go back a long way in this country to the trial of Aaron Burr when he killed another lead, Alexander Hamilton, if anyone's seen the play, right? Yes, you can run for president, you can be indicted, you can even be convicted, depending on what the crime is.
Okay, Linda, stay here. Linda, okay. Kenny Barton, thank you very much. Stay here. We're going to go back to you later on in the program. Now, we're still watching those pictures. Just to remind you again of that, you're going to get really bored of this picture, I'm afraid, until Donald Trump appears. This is the corridor inside the courthouse, round the corner. We're waiting for Donald Trump to appear at any moment. We have been told, I've said this before, that he will say something, and this is a man, if given a chance to say something, will not pass on that chance. Now, it often looks, America rather, often looks like a country riven by political tribalism, with opinions pushed even further to the extremes. That is the case not just here in New York, but also, of course, in the rest of the country. Minnie Stevenson has been to the solidly red, in other words, Republican state of Tennessee, to see what voters there, what people there think of the extraordinary events in New York.
Welcome to Wendell's Diner in Tennessee. It's fair to say we are firmly in Trump terrain here. But as you know, it hasn't always been Republican-leaning. Former Democrat President Bill Clinton won in this state in both his elections in the 90s. But when it comes to the Trump era here, in the home of country and Western music, and of course, Dolly Parton, it is definitely as red can be now. But as Donald Trump becomes the first former US president to face criminal charges, will that change things for people here? We've been speaking to the largely Republican-leaning locals. Jakey, I know you're...
Okay. All right. We are now seeing Donald Trump appearing. There he is, walking, sauntering almost. He's disappeared from view again, sauntering into that corridor. Now he's sauntered out of vision. Okay, we're just waiting for him to appear again. He might be coming around the corner any minute now. So we're waiting for him to appear in that corridor, the corridor in the courthouse around the corner, where he apparently will say something. We saw him very briefly there. He came out, he sauntered out very slowly, very deliberately, the way that he walks, we know that by now, having received his charges, to which he, of course, one assumes pleaded not guilty. We're still now waiting for him to appear. And Linda, Kenny Barton is still with me, next to me. We're going to finally hear what those charges are, although he might not be telling us in detail what they are, but we will know, right? So when you see that picture, right, as someone who's been on the sharp end of the law, the good sharp end of the law, let me make that certain, what goes through your mind as an American citizen?
Well, you know, in one way, it's tragedy for the United States of America, right? But in another way, it shows that no one is above the law. So it can be a tragedy, but also it can be a validation for the United States of America that we are a democracy and that we will seek justice wherever it is.
Okay. Okay, well, we're still waiting for him. Journalists have been clearly allowed into that corridor. And Linda, you say that's a very positive attitude, right? This is a kind of teachable moment to the rest of the world that America has a system of justice. But on the other hand, you wouldn't really expect someone like Donald Trump to have been president and to end up in this position either. I mean, he's a unique creature.
Well, but some people say that that's exactly what they would expect, that he would be the person that would end up, that he has skated his whole life. That's what his opponents of Donald Trump do say. And I do say that, I live and work about 2 or 3 blocks from Trump Tower. Seeing him come out this morning, he looked a little bit less confident. He was more hunched over, looked more worried. When you say you're under arrest, I don't care who you are or who you have been. That is something that really
It's a sobering moment.
Yes.
Yeah. We're just going to run that shot one more time. This is the shot of Donald Trump coming out. I mean, normally we'd expect to see more Trump, but we're not seeing a lot of him at the moment. We will do eventually. This is not a man who's exactly camera shy, but he has been a little bit camera shy this morning. Who knows what other procedures do you think might be going on right now?
Well,
Linda?
He's going to be meeting with his lawyers. Obviously, when the judge brought him in, first of all, he went in and he had his fingerprints taken. There was a rumor that the Secret Service were actually going to take him so that they wouldn't go into what's called AFIS, which is the automatic system with every other criminal that's been under arrest. He didn't have a mugshot taken. He would be brought before the court. I don't know if the judge issued a gag order. That would be one thing we have to find out. Yeah. He would set a timetable for scheduling depositions, and he would also take his plea. Now, I'm interested to see, did he plead not guilty like O.J. Simpson? Did he say, I am 100% not guilty? Or did he say something else? Or did his attorney speak for him?
The devil will be in the detail for him and for us reporting the story. Stay here, Linda. I've said it before. We've still got that eagle eye on that corridor, but we're not going to be watching lino floors all day long. Okay, so let's get back to Minnie Stevenson in Tennessee, who's been talking to voters, some with Trump, some against him. Let's listen.
Jakey, I know you're aware Trump is being indicted today. Well, what's your take on it? Are you a fan?
Yeah, personally, I don't like him individually, but I like some of the things he's done.
I'm not a Trump fan. And I have to admit, I voted for him twice, but I wouldn't vote for him again.
You're sending mixed messages there.
That's right, it certainly is. But I think he and Joe Biden need to take a long trip around the world that'll last about 4 years, and we need to get new leadership in Washington.
Love Trump.
Do you?
Yeah, big Trump supporter.
And the fact that he's the only US president in history to face criminal charges, that doesn't put you off at all?
Not even a little bit. He's better than who we have, right?
Do the crime, you got to do the time. They wouldn't treat me any different, so that's my stance on that.
Donald Trump will, I'm sure, say he's innocent. Do you think it'll put people off voting for him? He's going to run in 2024.
Oh yeah, people will still go. That's just through the law is designed. People will still go try to vote for him because there's a lot of people that did agree with what he done. At the end of the day, I know what I want.
Who do you walk with?
I walk with God himself, but see, I still pray for Trump.
Trump is obviously going to stand, he says, in 2024. Do you think it will put Republican voters off that he's facing these criminal charges, or do you think in a weird way it may help give him more publicity?
I think a lot of people are maybe getting on his bandwagon just because they think he's being taken advantage of. So we'll see. And Joe Biden, I hope he doesn't try to run again. He's too old to run.
Well, as you can hear, nobody is sitting on the fence here. As for Donald Trump, he says despite all of this, he will continue his 2024 bid for the White House. But there is an interesting trend here, which I think is worth noting amongst Tennessee Republicans. When it comes to that all-important Republican nomination, in some polls, Donald Trump is not the favourite, which begs the question, after today, will a tendency to dump Trump in other red states intensify, or will in fact the exposure here give him a boost and lead him on to another term? On that cliffhanger, back to you.
Minnie Stevenson there, thank you very much, in the Republican state of Tennessee talking to voters. And just to remind you, a short time ago, a few minutes ago, we saw Donald Trump, now someone who's facing 53 or 35 rather charges, criminal charges. We don't know exactly what they are, in that courthouse around the corner in Manhattan. We're expecting to see him again at some stage in the near future when he will apparently talk to us talk to the press, talk to America, the country that he once led as president. Well, a short time ago, before we came on air, I spoke to Dr. Eddie Glaude, who's professor of African American Studies at Princeton University, and I began by asking him whether there was anything at all positive that we could draw from today's drama here in New York.
Well, I think that, it's a challenge to describe it as positive. I think what we're witnessing is a moment in which Donald Trump, as a political actor, is being held accountable. It's a challenge to the idea of the imperial presidency, that the person who holds that office is somehow above the law, above everyday ordinary folk. But it's also a moment in which the cold civil war in the United States is now intensified. Donald Trump is an avatar. He's an avatar for so many folk who are overrun by grievance, by fear, by a sense of marginalization.
But of course, the problem here is that, this is such a tribal country that one side is now believing in the kind of wheels of justice, and the other side is saying that justice has been politicized. And I wonder how dangerous that moment is for America.
Oh, it's extraordinarily dangerous, but one side is right? I think we need to be very clear about that, right? I think, to kind of engage in a kind of both-sidism on this issue is dangerous. I mean, there's one side that is committed to the rule of law, committed to democracy, and the other side that is challenging the rule of law, that's undermining the basic principles and precepts of democracy itself. But I think at the heart of the debate is the question of trust.
The last time we spoke, after the 2020 presidential election, you told me that you thought American democracy was in peril. Do you still think that today?
Absolutely. Absolutely. There are forces in our country who believe that if we continue along the road that we are, that they will lose the America that they cherish. These are people who believe that government has placed its thumb on the scale on behalf of minorities, on behalf of those who somehow fall outside of their conception of the cultural mainstream. There are those who are willing to give over their responsibility, to hand it over to autocrats, to politicians who have no real sense of what democratic values and norms mean. And so that hasn't been resolved. The contradictions that define the country haven't been resolved in so many ways.
On that note, the Reverend Al Sharpton just last week held a vigil for the district attorney, Alvin Bragg, who's an African American, because he feared for his safety because of the language used by the defendant, Donald Trump, about the district attorney. Are you worried that this court case in Manhattan, could have racial implications for the rest of the country?
Oh, absolutely. He's already used anti-Semitic and racist remarks to describe, D.A. Bragg. He's already talked about the presiding judge in language that has racial overtones. Of course, the history of the country suggests that racial violence is always on the immediate horizon when people feel as if their way of life is threatened. But it's also a kind of bit of irony. Wrapped around the legs of the table upon which the Declaration of Independence was signed was the serpent of slavery. And now we have a descendant of slaves holding one of the most powerful men in the country to the standard of the rule of law. It's an example of the power of the country, but it's also an example of the deep contradictions. We have to be afraid. If we're not, then we're naive. We have to be diligent. If we're not, we're complicit.
But in your democracy, you can also run for president even if you've been convicted of a crime. So imagine Donald Trump getting through this whole process, whatever the outcome might be, and getting re-elected as president, which is not inconceivable. What would you say then?
It would seal the fate of the nation, to be honest with you. If everyday ordinary folk allow that to happen, then I would honestly say that American democracy is on the cooling board. It's taking its last breath. It's in our hands. It's in the people's hands.
Professor Eddie Glaude, thank you very much indeed.
Thank you, sir. Always a pleasure.
And there we go. This is the first stills photograph of Donald Trump in court presumably listening to the charges read out to him. We don't know exactly how many charges yet or exactly what those charges are, but we will find out imminently. This is a position that Donald Trump probably never thought he would be sitting in. The former president of the United States making the wrong kind of history in his book today in the courtroom behind me. So this is, this is remarkable stuff, really. And there'll be more images to come later on. The court, there was the negotiations beforehand, and specifically they did not want cameras in the court. They only wanted still photographs. Well, New York has always had an on-off relationship with Mr. Trump. The city that hates to sleep now loves to hate him. He was born and raised here. His name has been emblazoned on so many skyscrapers in this city. But now New York has turned on the man who always thought that he was part of the city.
New York, I love you, but you're bringing me down.
New York City's famous son is home. No warm welcomes, no hand of friendship, just the strong arm of the law.
But you're bringing me down.
New York was the center of his universe, and Trump wanted to rule supreme. He loved the uptown glitz, the downtown grit. This place put him on the map as a tycoon, as a TV star, ridiculed but cherished, part of the Gothic furniture of Gotham City. But as a president, New York City never returned the favor. His love was unrequited, and it hurt. And now, instead of the acceptance he craved here, the comeuppance he feared. In the 80s and 90s, Trump set out to conquer Manhattan with cement and granite, and of course his supersized name, as brash and confident as the skyscrapers above him. Look at me, they screamed, and be amazed.
The institutions that finance what I have, they happen to be in love with Donald Trump. But they're not in love with me because I'm a nice guy or anything. They're in love with me because everything I've done has been a tremendous winner.
The boy from the outer borough of Queens had always wanted to play a bigger game. His dad's real estate empire hadn't stretched into Manhattan. But young Donald knew if he could make it here, he could make it anywhere. His romance with the city outlived his marriages. 2 of his wives wed here, of course. Divorces, debts, and money dramas followed. But The Apprentice came along, and brash once again became beautiful. Then the smell of something bigger wafted in from Fifth Avenue. Deep inside the golden halls of Trump Tower, a plan to run for president was forming. What do I call you, by the way?
Call me Donald. Are you sure? Whatever you want. Okay.
Then the world didn't think that anyone would be calling him Mr. President, let alone the first ex-president in US history to be indicted. What keeps you up at night?
I sleep well. I sleep really well.
A few years after that interview, he announced his candidacy. The odds the bookies gave him to win the White House were 100 to 1.
And your host, Donald Trump.
Live from New York, it was Saturday night, and one of the more bizarre campaign appearances in the 2016 race.
We're going to have a lot of fun tonight.
You're a racist.
Who the hell is, I knew this was going to happen. Who is that?
Trump's a racist.
Then finally, the moment he'd been waiting for. President Trump, the winner, gazing down from the Empire State Building, no less, in face not name, the master of the universe. It took a while to sink in. But it wasn't his beloved city that put him there. New York became heart of Trump resistance.
Love, not hate, what makes America great.
Protests against his policies seemed fiercest here. So too did legal probes into his affairs and his associates. And now he's back where it all began, where he once said that he could shoot someone and not lose one voter. But it's not voters he needs today, it's lawyers.